Hi, everybody. I can't stop saying that now. It's kind of my catchphrase. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for braving the weather. It's actually not quite a pleasant day. It was raining pretty hard a little earlier, and I imagine traffic was quite tough. So it's pretty cool when you're able to fill a room despite the fact that the weather doesn't cooperate. And I do apologize, I don't have my boots on. I actually had a gout attack right before I flew out here, and so I took some prednisone and some painkillers, and I'm able to walk, but I can't wear boots yet. So you'll see me back in boots in 3 or 4 days, but yeah, I hope so. Good to see you too, Alex.
Hi.
You know, he's been translating for me since 2015, and he's still the best translator in all of Japan. At least the best one from Osaka. Anyway, we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary for the release of Cardano. We released in September of 2017. A lot of you were here. Dr. Ada was here. Miyataki was here. And boy, it's just amazing to see how much has changed. I mean, back then we were just saying, God, can we get a working wallet? Can we get listed on an exchange? And now we have people building payment systems and supply chain systems. I was just in Mongolia. I met the president of the country, flying to Georgia after this, the country, and meeting the prime minister. And just what a difference 2 years makes, huh? But one thing that hasn't changed is just how amazing, friendly, and loyal, and just good-spirited our community has been, especially here in Japan. I have a long journey ahead of me. After Georgia, I go to Israel, and then to Virginia, and then I go to Uganda. I'm going to meet a king there, so that's going to be interesting. I've never met a king before. I go to Uganda, then after Uganda, I fly to Korea, then to Buenos Aires. But I always look forward to coming to Japan, because this is really the best community for Cardano, and will always be the best community. Why is that? Well, because there's a lot of magic in this project. You know, we're doing some really interesting things. In 2015, we're very aspirational. We woke up and said, let's go hire a bunch of scientists and get a bunch of engineers and just go and see how far we can innovate and what we can do in 5 years. So we wrote 40 papers. We've already written the code, I think, 3 times now. We've done a huge amount of work. EMURGO's done a huge amount of work. And along the way, we've uncovered a lot of really interesting things about how to scale systems, how to make systems interoperable. But the core of all of it has always been trying to build something that's useful for people. And if it's not useful, you can't really do much. You see, when I go to Mongolia, I don't have a conversation with the Minister of Foreign Affairs that goes like, hey, can you go build me a cryptocurrency wallet that does random input selection so we don't have UTXO fragmentation? I've never had that conversation with any policymaker. They say to me, hey, 18% of the medicine we have here in Ulaanbaatar is adulterated, which means it's either counterfeit or it's expired or it's mislabeled or it's actually just fake. It's a sugar pill. Go to Ethiopia, they don't say, hey, can you build us some really cool fast finality, instant settlement, Byzantine resistant protocol. They say, hey, it takes me 2 hours, 3 hours to pay my power bill in Addis Ababa. I'd like that to be done in 15 seconds. You see, we get so caught up in the technology and the buzz phrases and the terms, this, that, and the other, the proof of stake versus proof of work, you know, this monetary policy versus this, staking this, that we forget at the end of the day, it's just about people, and it's about problems. And either we can solve them or we can't. And we can solve them with principles or we can't solve them. And every solution carries a series of trade-offs, just like going to work. You can ride a bicycle, you can walk, you can drive. It just depends on the weather, how far away it is to work, what physical shape you're in. And it's the same for cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. There's thousands of them, and there's going to be thousands of them. And each and every one of them does something if they're useful. And they have different philosophies. There's nothing unreasonable about Hyperledger Fabric or EOS or these systems, but they do assume that someone's in control. Other systems try to be decentralized, and there's a price to pay for that. And one of the things our industry is trying to figure out as we navigate this space is what prices are we willing to pay, and what philosophies are we willing to adopt? One of the reasons this project focuses so much on academia, so much on writing papers, so much on the scientific method, is that we don't know the future. And the problem is, if you don't know the future, it's hard for you to pick one path. You have to know your trade-off profile. You have to know the different options you have. You have to know that you're allowed to ride your bike or walk in addition to drive. And that's really been the heart of this project's research effort, is to try to figure this out, to figure out if we were to shard, what are we giving up? If we were to increase the privacy, what are we giving up? if we're to comply with a particular regulation, who is impacted by that, and how do we know so that we don't lose these things on the back end and you lose your money? It's a simple concept, but strangely it's not really followed in our space. And this is not just important for me, because I build stuff, it's important for you. Because if this is a real cryptocurrency, if it's a really decentralized ecosystem, I'm not in charge, you are. And so that means each and every one of you have to be armed with a lot of facts, a lot of information. Very soon, our protocol is going to begin rapidly decentralizing. Shelley is coming. The testnet will probably come out 1 to 2 weeks for the self node, and after that, very quickly we'll have a proper beta, and then very quickly we'll be fine-tuning incentives, and we'll wake up and Shelley's here, and that means you're running the network. It means you're in charge. You have to make decisions. Where do we go? A or B, left or right, up or down? Not me. And so the only way we're going to be sensible about it is if everybody's on the same page, if we all have the same source of information, we know what we're looking at. There's some difficult choices ahead. For example, the FATF made some recommendations, the G20's talking about them, and there's a legitimate conversation about saying that eventually we're going to have to embed metadata into cryptocurrency transactions. What does that mean? It means that some people in the world believe that every time you send a Bitcoin or an ADA, that has to be connected to your real life identity. Is that a good idea? Some people think so. And it doesn't really matter what I think. At some point it's going to be your decision of whether you want to do that or not. So how do you go about making that decision? Thinking, is this just and lawful? Do I want to comply? Do I think this is a bad idea? The only way we're going to get about this is if we're all looking at the same set of facts. That's why we use the scientific method. That's why we write things the way we do. That's why we're a little slower, because these things matter. And they matter not just today. They matter 10 years from now and 20 years from now. Your children will live with the impacts of these systems. Your grandchildren will live with the impacts of these systems. So we have to be methodical. So as we get closer to the 2nd anniversary of Cardano, you know, the test nuts will come out, and eventually Shelley will come out, and Gauguin will be shortly behind that. After that, excuse me. And then after that, we'll do Basho, and then Voltaire is really where it comes in for you guys. You see, we'll have this beautiful piece of software. It'll work well for a lot of people, and there's a lot of tough choices to make. And that's the reason we have EMURGO and the Cardano Foundation, and that's the reason we do community management. It's the reason why I travel so much. It's the reason why I talk to so many people. I've been to 52 countries in the last 5 years. 52. And what consistently amazes me, no matter where I go, is just how passionate and deeply informed people are when I travel around. You know, I remember being in Rwanda and actually meeting cryptocurrency fans who were asking me very specific questions about how Cardano uses VRFs. You don't really imagine that in Rwanda. You know, this is a country in 1994 went through one of the worst genocides in modern history, and I'm getting asked detailed cryptographic questions by a 17-year-old that learned how to do these things on the internet. It's a pretty amazing story. And just makes me think about scale. That's the hidden superpower of our entire industry. See, when we started IOHK, it's just Jeremy and me. It was 2 people. Now we're 200 people. It seems like a lot, but the Cardano ecosystem has hundreds of thousands of people in it. And we'll wake up and maybe next year my company doubles in size. God help me. The Cardano ecosystem could have 1 million people at that point. Wake up the next year, maybe I double. Yeah, I'd have 800 then. We could have 10 million. No matter how many people I hire, I'm not smarter than the entire ecosystem. That's the collective power of this. And these kids, they work really hard. When in Ethiopia, we just completed a class, 23 women we trained to program. The capstone of the course was to use the programming language we developed for Cardano. It's called Plutus. And some of the girls who were writing smart contracts for it actually discovered some problems with the programming language. And the capstone was taught by the person who created it, Philip Wadler. So can you imagine that? This 60-year-old prominent computer scientist with 25,000 citations and hundreds of papers, a titan of his field, created the Haskell programming language, created Plutus. And you have this young girl who's 21 years old from Ethiopia who just learned the programming language, and she discovered a mistake he made. So we hired her.
だから彼女を雇用しました。
She's good.
かなり有能です。
And you know what she's going to work on? She's working on building a currency right now for Addis Ababa. There's 6 million people in that city. And it takes a long time to do simple things like pay your power bill, your water bill, pay your cell phone bill, and they'd like to digitize the local money. I'd love to see Cardano be part of that story. You see, this is a layered ecosystem. There's many moving components. Some we build, some other people build, like EMURGO. Some require an enterprise ledger. Some can be done on Cardano itself. And that's the point of all this, is that it really does take a village, and every person builds their part. At the Imperial Hotel earlier today, a lovely hotel. It was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and Einstein stayed there once. And I was downstairs in the arcade, and I walked by this sword shop, and they have all these old katanas from the 17th and 16th century and so forth. And if you look at them, they're really amazing pieces of engineering. And it's a great example of what our industry is like. Because you see the finished product, you see the sword, but it's not made by one person. Somebody had to mine the metal, which is a process unto itself, and there's not many places in Japan that have ore that can do that. Then somebody actually had to pound out the sword, usually multiple people. Then somebody had to polish it and sharpen it. And every stage of the way is pure craftsmanship. And blockchains are exactly the same. And the solutions built from blockchains are exactly the same. Like this Ethiopia pilot, just think about it. Half a dozen government agencies have to be involved. You have to have cash in and cash out points to digitize the bearer. You have to actually issue a token. You have to have a payment system to carry it. You have to have a cell phone app or an alternative payment system, so maybe a Tangem card or something like that. You actually have to create a cash out system on the back end for the utility companies and get them on board with this and rewrite their software. And there's probably 6 or 7 other dozen steps I'm missing because we haven't finished the feasibility study yet. And that's just to get to the point where I can push a button to pay my bill. I see the finished sword, but think about all the things that go into that. And that's not even saying anything about privacy, security, and correctness. So even if you built the whole system, what happens when the system has bugs and holes in it? Money doesn't work. See, that's why we came to Japan first for Cardano. That's really the legacy of it. We wanted to come to a place where people were patient enough and had enough common sense to realize that great things do take time. We've certainly used the abundance of it. But it's so satisfying to actually see that we're getting towards the end of the first generation, and we're now getting to a stage where people are able to build real things, real companies solving real problems with partnerships. We're working with a major sneaker company on something. We're working with governments. Mongolia, we talked about an air quality pilot. Georgia is going to be fun. It's actually the birthplace of wine, so I'm probably going to do something with wine there. That'll be fun. I'll get all you can drink free wine. And we only got to that point because we spent 4 years working to get there. And what happens is you have great acceleration. I can only take us so far, and then you take us further, and then the people who like you take us further. And we wake up, and that's how you change the world. So he was a guy who loved plants, and he was an agricultural scientist, and he was really good at growing stuff. In fact, he was so good at it that he said, I got to go teach other people how to do this. And over the course of his life, he prevented so many famines that they estimate that he saved 1 billion lives. Not 1 million, 1 billion. 1/7 of the world is here because of one man.
一人の人間の功績により人口の7分の1が救われた。
That you've never heard of.
でも誰も聞いたことがない人。
And that's the magic of the technology that we're building, is that it can create thousands of Normans in the future. You don't have to hear of them, but you'll feel the things that they do. Great technology does that. Great societies do that. And as my time comes to a close, as we start moving to a point where the community's running things, Cardano's as much yours as it is mine. And I look so forward to seeing what happens with it and where we go in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. And as long as we stay true to our principles and we stay true to what got us here today, we're unstoppable. And we'll wake up and there'll be 100 million. And we'll wake up and there'll be 1 billion people using the platform. And it's going to change everything. It's going to change the way you vote. It's going to change the way your identity works. It's going to change the way your money works. It's going to change the way you do business. And it's going to make everything a bit easier for everyone. But we're only going to get there if we work together. So I'm very proud of this community, and I'm very proud to see how you've kept the passion through the good times and the bad times. And I can't wait to see where we go. So thank you so much for coming in the rain, and I hope we have time for at least 1 or 2 questions. Second, you have the story of why you're doing that. Very few people just randomly send money to people. Usually when you give money to Bob, you're doing it because you're buying something from him, or he's doing a service. There's some reason. Maybe you philosophically agree and you're making a donation. So that's called the metadata. Why are you doing that? Why are you sending the value? And third, that object that you're moving, that story, Alice and Bob in the transaction, they all live within a regulatory environment or multiple environments. So there's this concept of compliance with that regulatory environment. And that could be everything from taxation to regulation, like securities regulations for STOs, for example. So now we have a cognitive model. We have a way of kind of looking at Alice and Bob, and we say, all right, so I first have my asset, then I have the story about it, then I have this idea of compliance with the tax regime. So Bitcoin only does the first item. You can just move the value, but it really doesn't let you embed metadata. It doesn't really let you put compliance artifacts into the transaction or contingencies in the transaction, which is one of the reasons why I built Ethereum with Vitalik. We needed more programmability to get there. So going from the general to the particular, what will we do for Cardano? My advice is to look at some emerging standards that are going to make it easier to work around a regulatory environment. In particular, two things. One is the concept of a DID. It stands for a decentralized identifier. Microsoft is using it for their identity system. IBM has something called Hyperledger Indy. There's the Sovereign Foundation. There are many people who have adopted this particular standard, and it's pretty ubiquitous around it. But basically, it's just like a web address for your identity. But it's a concise URN, so you can embed it into the transaction itself. So it makes a lot of sense to me to allow people to optionally label transactions or label addresses with DIDs. So first you can identify the parties that are sending and receiving money and the jurisdictions that the parties are associated with.
Sorry, what is it called? A DID?
A DID, decentralized identifier, DID.
Okay, thank you.
The second concept is this idea of contingent settlement. And this is something that Bitcoin doesn't support, at least not in its most evolved form. And it's kind of a silly thing that it doesn't, because basically what that means is before something settles, in other words, the transaction's finalized, you have some if statements that are associated with it. You have some predicates you have to solve. So for example, you could say, I'm a not-for-profit, and I want you to donate some money to me. But before you do, you have to sign the donation deed. So if you send a transaction without a donation deed, it won't settle. I won't take the money. But if you send it with a signed deed with your identity on it, then the transaction settles. That's a very simple contingency. But they're composable, so you can add as many contingencies as you want to that particular transaction. So it turns out if you have those two foundational items, then you can actually be in full compliance with every government in the world. Here's how. The government can basically come in and write a special purpose library of contingencies associated with your addresses and your transactions, and then you can just embed them within your address or your transaction. So Japan can have a Japanese library, Russia can have a Russian library, and some may be very invasive. For example, China may require the ability to de-anonymize the transaction and know all the parties involved, whereas maybe Liechtenstein doesn't care at all and they don't even want to apply taxation. But these two structures give you enough flexibility that you're able to do these things. And then my discussions with regulators are, what do you want? And we just write the library, and then you can, as a user in that jurisdiction, connect it into your transaction flow at no cost. But in closing, there are three really important differences, briefly, with this system versus the old system. One, it is automatic. In the old system, it's manual. It's done by a whole bunch of human processes or bespoke software specifically for your type of transaction. Okay, so two, it's consensual. So you decide to be in compliance, not the bank or someone else. You decide how much you want to put into the transaction, and that's basically something that no one can take away from you. So it's self-sovereign. It's decentralized. And third, this is probably the most important, it's transparent. You know what the rules are up front. We live in a world where if I got sick and I go to the hospital in America, I don't even know how much money it's going to cost me. There's no prices on the wall. I just have to deal with whatever they send me. And it's the same with tax law. It's the same with securities regulations. It's read our mind, pay a lawyer to help you figure it out, and if you get it wrong, we punish you. That's the current system we're in. Whereas this system, all the rules are up front. They're programmable. They come from libraries. You can see how much the transaction cost you. You can see your tax burden before you do it. Yeah, and actually what this does is it allows you to, for the first time ever, be able to empirically see the differences in countries in terms of their cost of the regulatory structure. You say, how much more expensive would it be for me to do this transaction in Japan versus South Korea or versus the United States or versus Liechtenstein? We've never been able to do that before.
さらにじゃあそういったその制度に対してのコンプライアンスのコストっていうのが今までどうしてもその、客観的に、明確にはなっていなかったんですね、どんなに頑張ってそれで現地で調査をしたとしてもそれが明確には分からなかったのがこれからはもうソフトウェア上で、どこの国でどういったビジネスを行うのが一番、賢いのかというのが明確に分かると思います。
And you're supposed to be a democracy. You guys are in charge of this country, so you might be able to then go to your politician and say, why does it cost 2 times as much money to do business in my country than it does in the country across the street? That's really the magic of these systems, is that they're like a giant mirror that allows us to look at ourselves, our country, our commercial systems, our laws, our regulations, and see them for what they really are, the bare naked truth. Some are great, some are not so great. And for the first time ever, we're building systems that give this to everyone, not just the wealthy, powerful people like the Bill Gateses of the world, but every person. You can just see the numbers and you can make a map. Some are green, some are red. Okay, we have time for one more question.
I don't think we do. Do
Well,
we
they
have
all
time?
came this way for me.
One more? Okay, one more.
Okay. Where you from? Detroit, Michigan. Oh man, that's a long way from home. I just came in from Colorado. Yeah.
Good old U.S. So I wanted to ask you a question about artificial intelligence, which
Okay.
I know for a fact it's not cryptography, but I feel like it's related to the blockchain space to an extent. So I'm asking this question after looking at different groups such as Google and OpenAI, and they're doing multi-agent reinforcement systems.
Uh-huh.
And I was wondering, like, how does IOHK, or what are you guys doing in order to be able to actually, like, catch their move into the space? Because it looks like, from what it seems, when it comes to card games like Hanabi, and they're creating systems that actually allows people to make decisions based on partial information, asymmetric information, that they're going to definitely come in soon. And just asking questions about how you guys preparing for the artificial intelligence movement into blockchain.
Yeah, this comes up a lot. You want to translate that?
Yeah.
So, we often joke if you ever want to get funded, what you should do is, set up a social network that uses IoT and blockchain. Then you've covered all of the buzzwords in the spectrum, right? It's like, oh my God, this is the most fundable business ever. Throw in fake news or something also. It's always fun. The first was a great AI expert. He recently passed away, but a wonderful human being named Marvin Minsky, if you're familiar with him. He came out of MIT, and he was kind of a titan in the AI space. He'd been around for 40 years or 50 years of research. And he talked a lot about, well, what can these systems really do and where can they really go? And there's really 2 broad blobs of AI research. One is we want to solve very specific problems from gigantic sets of data. Translation, self-driving cars, whatever it might be. We want to refine something so that when we ask it a question like, Watson, what's my disease? It's able to somehow interpret from a gigantic blob of data what that means. And we've gotten really good at that. That's why I can talk into my phone, and that's why we have real-time translation. It's why Tesla is able to create self-driving cars. And 95% of the innovation we see in the AI world comes from that side of the space. Now, while these systems are impressive, and in many cases they do superhuman things, they can do something far better than I could or any person could do, they don't have a narrative about them. They don't have free will. They're not conscious. They can't think. It's not like interacting with a human being. For example, AlphaGo isn't going to have an existential crisis and decide to stop playing Go and become a painter. That's probably not going to happen anytime soon. The other blob is all about, can we reconstruct human consciousness, free will, these types of things, and embed it somehow into cold silicon? And tons of interesting projects. Stanford has one led by an African gentleman, name escapes me, called Neural Grid, and there's dozens and dozens and dozens of these things. But basically create a thinking system where I don't have to tell it what to do. It's just going to go around and kind of learn as it goes. And somewhere along the way, emergently, it'll develop some sort of a personality, and it can do things and think and act just like you and me think and act. Now, we've been doing this since McCulloch and Pratt created the artificial neural network back, I think it was in the 50s. Was that almost 70 years worth of research, and we haven't actually gotten anywhere yet. We've written a lot of papers. We've learned a lot. We've learned that the design space is more elegant than we thought, and certainly Some people believe at some point we'll get to a point where we create a strong AI, but for the most part, it still lives more in science fiction than science fact. There are financial incentives, but most of the incentives actually live in the other block. Build expert systems that are tightly scoped that do one particular thing. Predict my stock price, translate, drive my car, diagnose this disease based upon a large set of data. So I don't tend to worry too much about the strong AI side. And if you read a lot of the work from Marvin Minsky, you can kind of break down why it's such an incredibly hard problem. Now, your specific question was, well, where does blockchain fit into this grid? Is it more on the left or on the right? And what do we think about as a company in this set? Well, we're like basically a super specialized database. We're an aggregation point for information that is time-stamped, immutable, auditable, and very reliable. Not massive sets of data, but very special, very valuable data, which is part of a larger data set you would need for expert systems to help you make decisions about things. But it doesn't directly map onto the development of an AI system. Our space is a consumer of AI. So for example, the de-anonymization of transactions. If you look at companies like Elliptic or Chainalysis, you have these giant transaction graphs, and you have to start making decisions of who do these transactions belong to, what companies are connected to these things. So that's where actually these types of techniques are quite helpful to help you filter enormous amounts of chaos and bring order to it. Furthermore, it would also be interesting to use these types of systems to aid in the governance of a system. At the end of the day, if we have a voting system, that's only as good as the rationality, logic, and information available to the people voting. So wouldn't it be nice to have an expert system that acts as a sentinel and it let you know some things in an objective way that can't be gamed because it's based on algorithms? And actually, because of the emergent complexity of how these things are, at some point we will need somewhat superhuman capabilities to know if what we're doing is right or wrong. I met a lawyer recently from Stanford, and we had this great conversation on a bus about the immorality of the U.S. legal system. And he had a very particular complaint. In the United States, if ignorance of the law is not a defense against breaking one. But the problem is we have too many laws. And there's so many laws that there's a strong belief that every day a person commits at least a misdemeanor. Some people commit a felony by accident. There's even a book written about this. I think it's like 10 felonies a day or something like that. So he said, if we're to be a moral society, then the government should actually offer some form of an AI that interprets the law, and then you're allowed to ask it questions, and if it tells you that what you're doing is legal, even if it ends up being illegal, you get a get-out-of-jail-free card. Because it's immoral to pass all these laws. If you're not a lawyer, you can't understand them, and yet you're held accountable for these types of actions. If you want to analogize that to the cryptocurrency world, I'm an entrepreneur. He's an entrepreneur. He's an entrepreneur. We all have very complex legal questions we deal with every single day. We hire lawyers, and they're $600 an hour, and ain't nobody got time for that. No one got a budget for that, And I'm in 20 countries. Imagine my HR law costs there. I would love to have an expert system that I could just call up and say, if I do this with my employee, is it legal? If I send a transaction into this jurisdiction, or if I have this customer, am I okay? I think that's really the magic of AI and what it's going to do for us. It's fun to imagine recreating cognitive life and creating a superhuman intellect. And smarter men and richer men like Elon Musk think about these things and have the luxury to do so because they have enormous resources. But I have to be in here and now, and I have to deal with the problems before me. And the reality is that these open source frameworks that Microsoft and Google and these other companies are creating are actually now giving us capabilities that within the next 10 or 20 years, we could have these expert systems that we can ask questions like, is this legal? Is it safe to do business with this person? And get statistics back for free or near free for that. And that alone will revolutionize the way that we do business in a global world.
That was a lot.
I don't know how he does it.
Probably missed like half of it, though.
Oh, they got the point. So what are we doing? We're doing a drawing?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Charles, for the amazing speech, and also Alex for the amazing translation. Just now, earlier, I think we have given everyone a raffle tickets. So we are doing a lucky draw now. So Charles, can you please help us to pick 10 lucky winners for our amazing prize today.
Okay, so I just reach in and pick a number?
So the first 3 winners will get a set of this 3.
All right, first winner is 072.
72番
Raise your hand, 072. Her? Okay. Okay. All right, the next winner is Lucky 121. 121.
121番 121
Ha! Hey! Oh, this is a beautiful number. 110.
110番
2 times 5 times 11.
Two more.
Okay, 2 more. Let's see here. What do we got? Number 095.
095 95番です
Yay!
Gets a t-shirt and tote bag.
One more. All right, really gonna reach in now. Okay. Number 085.
85番 So 5 more for t-shirt.
Okay, here are the t-shirt drawings. Lucky t-shirts. 990.
990 is order
Oh. 066.
66番 This side up.
There, no, it's okay. It's okay. That's on me. 083.
83番
How many more? We got 3 more? Okay. Okay. 119.
119番
Hey! 140.
140番
All right, this is the last one.
Maybe another after everything.
All right, 137.
137番
Hey! All right, we're at 10.
And there's still a final chance.
Okay.
There's 3 more gifts. We designed this specifically for today. It's signed by Charles Hoskinson, and it's a limited edition with a number here.
104.
104番
104.
104. What?
All right.
Too bad. No.
We'll try this again. 124.
124番
Nice.
Okay, 2 more. Come on, you. All right, we got 133.
133番 最後の一人です
128.
128番
So just wrap things up? Yeah, I think we're good. I'll do it in English.
That's finished.
This wraps up the event. We hope you enjoyed it. We would like to ask Charles to stand up one final time. Let's give him a big round of applause. Thank him for his time.